Hello and welcome. Let's talk today bones and skeletal tissue. Now, here, when we go through and we talk tissues and organs of the skeletal system, we'll see tissues and organs of the skeletal system are going to include bones. We're going to go through and check them all out, cartilage, and ligaments. So, what we'll do first is we'll check out skeletal cartilages, get those taken care of, and then we'll jump into bone, get bone taken care of, and then we'll jump into ligaments and get ligaments taken care of. So here when we go through and we talk about skeletal cartilages, we're going to go through and we'll revisit all the different cartilages that we have seen. We have seen before that cartilage was the embryonic forerunner of most bones and covers as well. It's going to be found covering the ends of our joint surfaces as well. So it's the embryonic forerunner of most bones and it covers many joint surfaces, the ends of our bones where they form joint surfaces. Ligaments, we're going to see chapter, I believe, 9 it is, or something of that nature, where we'll go through, check out ligaments and see a little bit more tendons. We'll see ligaments are going to help hold bone to bone at a joint, while tendons are going to help attach muscles to bone. As we have talked about, we've seen before. Now, here when we go through and we talk about the skeleton, the human skeleton, as we've said before now, is initially made up of cartilages and fibrous membranes, but most of these are replaced then by bone. The few that remain are found in regions where flexible skeletal tissue is needed. So when we go through and we talk about the structure of skeletal cartilage is going to be skeletal cartilage is obviously one type of cartilage tissue. We've got 3 different types of cartilages, and we'll go through revisit all 3 of them. And now cartilage itself is going to consist primarily of water, which accounts for its resilience. Cartilage contains, we have said before, no blood vessels or nerves now. Skeletal cartilage is going to be surrounded by a perichondrium layer. It will be surrounded by a perichondrium layer. The perichondrium is a layer of dense, irregular connective tissue, and it contains the blood vessels from which the nutrients are going to diffuse through the matrix to reach the cartilage cells. Also, this perichondrium, it acts as a girdle to help resist outward expansion when cartilage is compressed. Now, when we go through and we talk about types of cartilage, skeletal cartilage is going to contain, again, as I've said before, representatives from all 3 types. And all have chondrocytes, as we have seen, lacunae, right? Chondrocytes are found, we said, in the lacunae. And then this is all found within an extracellular matrix. The first cartilage type we had was hyaline cartilage. When we talked hyaline cartilage was the most abundant skeletal cartilage. It is the most abundant skeletal cartilage. It's composed of, so when you talk about its structure, it's composed of spherical chondrocytes and fine collagen fibers, which we said were not detectable microscopically. The function of hyaline cartilage, if you recall, is to provide support with flexibility and resilience. Now, hyaline cartilage is going to be further subdivided according to the location where it's found and basically what it's doing. So here we can see first we have what we call articular cartilage. Now, articular cartilage is going to be this famous cartilage we've been talking about that's found at the ends of our bones where they form joints. So covers the ends of most bones at movable joints. That is going to be articular cartilage. Now, when we talk about costal cartilage, we're talking about our hyaline cartilage that connects the ribs to the sternum. Respiratory cartilage, again, hyaline cartilage, that forms the skeleton of the larynx. Nasal cartilage, it supports the external nose. Next, then let's move to elastic cartilage. When we talk about elastic cartilage, it looks like hyaline, right? When we looked at the structure, it looks like hyaline. However, it had way more elastic fibers running through it. Way more stretchy elastic fibers. The function, we said, of elastic cartilage is to stand up to repeated bending and still maintain shape. It's found in the external ear, we said, and the epiglottis. Here we can appreciate the epiglottis. And third, we had fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage. We talk fibrocartilage. It's a highly compressible cartilage. It has great tensile strength. And if you recall, it's basically found to have parallel rows, we said, of collagen fibers, alternating with basically chondrocytes in lacunae. So parallel rows of chondrocytes alternating with these thick collagen fibers that are found in a nice parallel arrangement. Now we talk fibrocartilage. Its function is to withstand heavy pressure and stretch. To withstand heavy pressure, and stretch. The locations, we said, in between the vertebrae, right? We said these areas are going to take a lot of shock. So the intervertebral discs, in between the knees, and then we also mentioned in between the two hip bones. Here's the pubic symphysis. So the knee menisci, intervertebral discs, and then the pubic symphysis. Let's move over to bone then from skeletal cartilages. Let's talk bone. Bone is going to come in many sizes and shapes. The function of bone, let's talk about here as well. Okay, along with bones, the skeleton in general. Number one is support. The skeleton provides us with a framework that supports the body. For example, the legs, they support the rest of the torso. They act as pillars. Protection. The fused bones of the skull are going to protect the brain that's inside. The vertebrae, they all come together to help protect the spinal cord. The ribs, they're helping to protect vital organs inside the thorax. Movement, another function, right? Bones and tendons and muscles will all basically come together, and the muscles will use the bones and basically as levers and basically allow parts to move. Mineral storage, mainly calcium and phosphate. And here we can also release these stored minerals into the bloodstream if we happen to be low. So you can have kind of a deposit and a withdrawal type of a system here with the minerals. Production of blood cells. Remember, we call that hematopoiesis. And this, we said, occurs in the marrow cavities of certain bones. It'll happen in the marrow cavities of certain bones. And then we have fat storage, triglyceride storage. Fat is going to be stored in the bone cavities of certain basically certain bones. And it's a source of stored energy. Acid-base balance and detoxification, other functions there. And detoxification. Now, the bones of the skeleton, we have about 207 bones at birth, but some are going to fuse as we age. And we have approximately 206 bones in us as an adult. Some of these bones we'll see are going to be accompanied by sesamoid bones, which are going to be bones that are formed within tendons, and they're usually formed due to stress. And then also we'll have sutural bones, wormian bones, we're going to go through and we'll look at as well. And these are extra bones of the skull, and they're not found in everyone. Not found in everyone. So here let's go through and let's look at this classification. So we've seen these 206 bones being divided up into an axial and appendicular skeleton. That's basically what we're revisiting here. So when we talk axial skeleton, we said that the axial skeleton is made up of bones that make up the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. And when we talk about the function of the axial skeleton is protecting, supporting, and carrying other body parts. And you can see it forms basically this central aspect. So right inside of here, in brown, you can see is all axial skeleton. Next one we have appendicular skeleton. And we talk about the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is made up of bones of the upper and the lower limbs, right? Upper, lower appendages. And also the girdles. These are basically the bones that are going to help append the limb bones to the axial skeleton. So here you've got the clavicle, and then we're going to see the scapula. So the limb bones plus their girdle bones. Here, the girdle bone we've got right inside of here. The hip bone, the coxal bone. Now the function of the appendicular skeleton is locomotion, to move from place to place, and manipulation of the environment. These bones also get classified according to their shape. Now, when we classify these bones according to shape, we can see we have a few different classifications here we'll check out as well. First, we have bones that are going to be long bones. These bones are named for their elongated shape, not their overall size. So when we describe these bones are described as being longer than they are wide, and they have a shaft and two ends to them. So here you could see a long bone. They have a shaft and they have two ends. One end, and here's the other end. Examples of long bones: all limb bones except the patella, your wrist bones, and your ankle bones. So all limb bones except patella, wrist bones, and ankle bones. Next we have short bones. Short bones, they are going to be described as being bones that are cube-shaped. They're cube-shaped. They are equal in length and width. Examples of short bones will include wrist bones and ankle bones. We'll also classify sesamoid bones here as well. Next one we have flat bones. Flat bones are thin, flattened, and a bit curved. They are thin, flattened, and a bit curved. Examples will include the sternum, our ribs, our scapulae, and most of our skull bones. And then the fourth classification is going to be irregular bones. Now, when we talk about irregular bones, they're described as having a complicated shape. vertebrae and your hip bones. Vertebrae and your hip bones. Examples of irregular bones. Let's go through and let's talk about the structure of bones. Now, when we talk about and we look at the structure of bones, first, bone is considered an organ, and we said in order for something to be considered an organ, it's going to be made up of two or more primary tissue types. So here when we go through and we talk about bone being an organ, bone's considered an organ because it contains various tissue types. Number one, bone tissue dominates, but also bone tissue contains nerve tissue. It contains nervous tissue. So bone tissue is connective tissue, nervous tissue, right? Two or more primary tissue types, we've got ourselves an organ, but usually four, so we'll get all four there. Cartilage, fibrous connective tissue lining the cavities, right? All connective tissue. Has muscle. Muscle is going to be found overlying bone. And also epithelia. Epithelia is going to be found in the blood vessels that serve as bone. So you can see here all four primary tissue types. Now when we go through and we talk about bone, we're going to look at, and we're going to talk about bone at three levels. We'll talk about it from a gross perspective, from a microscopic perspective as we have been doing, and then also from a chemical perspective, Now, when we look at the gross anatomy of bones, every bone is going to have a dense outer layer that's smooth and solid, and this layer is compact bone. Internal to this compact bone is spongy bone, if we're talking about certain bones. And internal to that compact bone is going to be in other areas. We'll see red bone marrow. Right inside the spongy bone. So you got red bone marrow. Or you can have yellow bone marrow, fat, as we have mentioned. So that's all going to depend on where we're at and what we're talking about. We'll go through all of that and we'll see all that. We'll clarify all that too. Now, when we go through, we talk about bone having markings to it. Bone's surface is rarely going to be, you'll see, completely smooth. Bone surface is also going to have projections. It'll display depressions. It'll display openings as well. And these depressions, projections, openings usually indicate stress from tendons, ligaments, and muscle. And also, they're going to serve as conduits. So first, let's talk about projections. Now, when we go through and we talk about projections, we've got all these different projections we're going to go through, and all these other components we're going to go through, we're going to check out, and we'll talk about, we'll see also. So here you can see we're going to have projections, and there are certain projections we're going to go through, we'll talk about, and we'll check out, but eventually you'll know basically every single one of these and what you have from here. So first here we're going to go through, we're going to look at tuberosities. When we go through and you have to identify such and such tuberosity, you have to be able to understand what you're looking for. Tuberosities are going to be large, rounded projections. They are large, rounded projections, and they are often, they can be roughened in appearance as well. For example, when we're seated in the seated position, we are seated on our ischial tuberosity. A large, rounded projection, and it's rough in appearance. And these can actually lead to decubitus ulcers in patients who are in a seated position for prolonged periods of time. It's a pressure point. Next then we have tubercles. So if you hear tubercles, what you have there is you have small rounded projection or a process. A small rounded projection or a process. A crest, when you hear of a crest is going to be a narrow ridge of bone. And it's usually prominent. You could feel it. Here we could see on this hip bone, we've got the iliac crest. It's an important landmark we're going to use. You also use the term line. A line is going to be a narrow ridge of bone. It's less prominent than a crest. A narrow ridge of bone, and it's less prominent than a crest. Here you can see the intertrochanteric line. And then is the term epicondyle. The prefix epi tells you this is something that's going to be found basically on or above. So epicondyle is a raised area on or above a condyle. Epicondyle, a raised area on or above a condyle. So here we can appreciate the medial epicondyle. Right out here is going to be the lateral epicondyle. And then these are the actual condyles. We're going to see these huge projections that serve as basically the term there's articulating sites. Next then we have the term trochanter. Here the two trochanters you have to know about. And trochanters are very large, blunt, irregularly shaped processes. Very large, blunt, irregularly shaped processes. And these are the only two you have to know about is going to be the ones on the femur. So these are projections. Again, they're outward growths, bulges you can think of from the bone's surface. And these, specifically speaking, the ones we just went over, are going to be projections that attach to muscles. Projections that attach to muscles. Next in here we have projections that are going to help form joints. Before we jump to there, we forgot two of them. We have spine and process. Spine is going to be a sharp, slender, often pointed projection. Right inside of here we can see an ischial spine. Here this is a sharp pointed process, a spinous process. So you see you can apply that term. And then we use the term process. Process is any bony prominence basically. Any bony prominence. Kind of like a generic term, I guess you could say. It's a process. Any bony prominence. Next in here we can see we've got projections that are going to help form joints. Now when we talk about projections that are going to help form joints, here we have a few of them. We have four of them that I want you to know about. First term is a head. When you hear the term head, the head is going to be a bony expansion. It's a bony expansion that's carried on a narrow neck. So right here we have our rib. Right here on the rib you can appreciate the head of the rib. Here then is the neck, basically the constricted part. So you can see that bony expansion carried on a narrow neck. Next is a condyle. When we use the term condyle, we're talking about, you can see, a rounded articular projection. We are talking about a rounded articular projection. Here we saw, we're going to have a condyle here, the lateral condyle of the femur and the medial condyle of the femur. They're better appreciated on the back. Next then we've got, after the condyle, we've got a ramus. Ramus is the arm-like bar of the bone. Here you can see it's the arm-like bar of a bone. And then last we have facet. Facet. When we talk facet, facet is a smooth or nearly flat articular surface. So right in here you can see a smooth, nearly flat articular surface. Next, let's check out some depressions, and we'll look at some openings as well. Now, depressions and openings we'll see are going to allow for the passage of, especially the openings for nerves and blood vessels. And we talk depressions, they'll actually contain certain structures. So first we have foci. Foci are going to be shallow basin-like depressions in a bone. Here in the skull, we're going to be able to appreciate the anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and we're going to have a posterior cranial fossa, and it's going to contain the actual brain, different parts of the brain. So shallow basin-like depressions in a bone. Whenever you hear anterior cranial fossa, that's, again, you have to be able to recall all of these terms from this chapter. Next is the term groove. Groove is a furrow. It's a furrow. A passage, again, for blood vessels. Next then is going to be a meatus. A meatus is a canal-like passageway. It's a canal-like passageway. Here are external acoustic meatus. Sound travels through to hit the tympanic membrane. Next is fissure. Fissure is a narrow slit-like opening. A narrow slit-like opening. And then we have the term foramen. Foramen is going to be a round or an oval opening through a bone. A round or oval opening through a bone. Next in is the term notch. Notch is an indentation at the edge of a structure. It's an indentation at the edge of a structure. Here we can appreciate a nice notch right inside of here. Right inside of here. Next we have the term sinus. When we talk sinus, sinus is basically a cavity within a bone. It's where the inside of the bone has been riddled out and it's lined with mucous membrane and filled with air. So cavity within a bone. Next then we have bone textures. So here we can go through and we can see we have compact bone and spongy bone. And then we have yellow bone marrow as well. We'll go through, we'll look at. So we talk bone textures, compact bone and spongy bone. Every bone we said is going to have an outer dense layer. And compact bone you can see to the naked eye. And an inner spongy bone layer. Now, compact bone is the external layer, while spongy bone is internal to the compact bone. And spongy bone is a honeycomb of small needle-like or flat pieces called trabeculae. And these trabeculae in spongy bone, basically they're tiny bone struts. They're tiny bone struts, and these tiny bone struts are going to help bone resist stress. They will help bone resist stress. Let's actually go through and let's look at the structure of a long bone. So here we can see long bone structure. And we talk about long bone structure. Long bones will have a diaphysis, a shaft to them, as we can see here. They will have a shaft to them, a diaphysis. And the shaft forms the long axis of the bone. The diaphysis is constructed of it's constructed of thick layers of compact bone that surrounds a central medullary cavity. That surrounds a central medullary cavity. The medullary cavity is yellow marrow cavity. It's called a yellow marrow cavity and it contains fat. We're talking adults. It'll contain fat. Then we also have the epiphyses. So here you can see all that fat, the yellow marrow cavity. Next then we have the epiphyses, the bone ends. The epiphyses, the bone ends, are formed of compact bone and spongy bone. The joint surface, as we talked about, is covered by a thin layer of articular or hyaline cartilage. Now, internal to the compact bone and the epiphyses, we have what we call hematopoietic tissue, red bone marrow, hematopoietic tissue. Now, this hematopoietic tissue, red bone marrow, is found within the trabecular cavities of spongy bone and also in the diploe of flat bones, in the center of flat bones. This hematopoietic tissue is more active in these flat bones because they have less fat containing medullary cavity like long bones do. So we'll resort to those bones if we need to take basically a sample of hematopoietic tissue. Here we can also appreciate the epiphyseal line. The epiphyseal line is also known as the metaphysis. also known as a metaphysis. It's found in adults, and it's located between the diaphysis and the epiphyses. Located between the diaphysis and the epiphyses. And what it is it's a remnant. It's a remnant of the epiphyseal plate. Next then is the epiphyseal plate. The epiphyseal plate is found in basically children all the way up to where growth is going to basically end. The epiphyseal plate is a disc of hyaline cartilage that grows during childhood to lengthen bone. Next then we have membranes or coverings. The first covering I'd like to talk to you about here is the periosteum. The periosteum is a glistening white double layered membrane. It's a glistening white double layered membrane that covers the entire external surface of long bones except for the joint surfaces, because there we have hyaline cartilage. So here we can appreciate long bone. Here we've got the periosteum peeled back. This periosteum has got two layers. So first layer is the fibrous layer. The fibrous layer is the outer layer. It's an outer layer of dense, irregular connective tissue. The second layer is the osteogenic layer. That's the inner layer. The osteogenic layer, the inner layer, it consists of osteoblasts, bone germinators. And then we have perforating fibers or Sharpey's fibers. These perforating fibers or Sharpey's fibers, you can see here, are going to help secure the periosteum to the bone. They will help secure the periosteum to the bone. What they are, they're tufts of collagen. They are tufts of collagen which extend from the fibrous layer of that periosteum to the bone matrix. All the way to the bone matrix. Also appreciated here are nutrient foramina. The nutrient foramina you can see here are going to be tiny openings. Openings in the periosteum, and what they do is they supply nerve fibers, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels as we see here, to the diaphysis of the bone. And then we can see here endosteum. When we talk endosteum, now endosteum is delicate connective tissue. It's a delicate connective tissue membrane that covers the internal bone surface. That covers the internal bone surface. Endosteum. It covers the trabeculae of spongy bone and lines the canals. So that is the structure of our long bones. Next then, let's move to short, flat, and irregular bones and their structure. When we talk short, flat, and irregular bones and their structure, I want you to know they have no shaft, they have no epiphyses. They do not have any type of a shaft nor epiphyses. They do have very active marrows. They have active marrow, so that marrow is going to be used for biopsies. So for example, we'll go to the sternum or even the hip bones, the coxal bones. And here you could see, basically looks like a sandwich. They refer to it as a diplo, where you have a layer of compact bone, and then the center, spongy bone. And we zoom in on the spongy bone here, you can appreciate the trabeculae. Tiny bone struts. Next, let's look at the microscopic anatomy of bones. Now, when we talk microscopic anatomy of bones, we're going to be looking at then basically bone cells. We talk bone cells, osteoblast, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. And we've talked about what each of them do. Osteoblasts, bone-forming cells. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. They're found in the lacunae, and they use those canaliculi to basically receive nutrients and so forth. And then you have osteoclasts, the third type, bone-dissolving cells. They'll break down bone-dissolving macrophages. And we also have osteogenic cells, stem cells. progenitor cells. So here when we go through and we talk about now compact bone looks dense but contains passageways for nerves and vessels. Compact bone, I want you to know, is adapted to support weight and withstand tension stress. So here when we look at compact bone under the microscope, here we can appreciate one osteon. And the one osteon has been broken down into, you can see a whole bunch of lamellae, and then the central canals we've talked about. So let's move from here to here. Here you can appreciate the same thing. Same thing here. Same thing here. So we'll remove one osteon, and here you can appreciate all the various lamellae. So when we go through, we talk osteons. Osteons are known as the Haversian system. Haversian system. What they are, they're the structural units of compact bone. They are the structural units of compact bone. Now here in relation to these osteons, we can appreciate the lamellae. So like we said before, the lamellae are like little plates. They're hollow tubes you can think of. Hollow tubes of bone matrix. Found surrounding the central canal. Found surrounding the central canal. The central canal then, also known as the Haversian canal. It runs through the core of each osteon. And it's going to contain, as you can see, blood vessels and nerve fibers. Then we have our perforating or Volkmann's canals. These perforating or Volkmann's canals, we said, are found lying at right angles to the long axis of the bone. And what they do is they connect the blood and the nerve supply of the periosteum to those in the central canals and the medullary cavity. Also appreciated here are the lacunae, the little hollow spaces found at the junctions of the lamellae. And we have said they are occupied by osteocytes. Here you can see the little osteocytes there very nicely, right inside of there. Then you have your canaliculi. So canaliculi we described as being, in the lab you'll see there as well. Here we can see they're going to be described as being little hair-like canals which connect lacunae to each other and to the central canal. Which connect lacunae to each other and then to the central canal. Now when we talk lamellae, we have two types of lamellae. So let's move out to here. And here we can appreciate the two types of lamellae. We have first what we call interstitial lamellae. Interstitial lamellae. Now interstitial lamellae are going to be the lamellae that fill the gaps in between the osteons. So that's what we've been looking at, are basically these interstitial lamellae. And then you also have your circumferential lamellae. The circumferential lamellae you can see right outside of here. These are deep to the periosteum. So right here's the periosteum, just deep to the periosteum. And they're going to be superficial to the endosteum. And they're spanning the entire diaphysis. And they resist long bone twisting. They resist long bone twisting. Next, then we have spongy bone. So when we talk spongy bone we've gone through, we've talked about, we've seen everything in relation to spongy bone. So make sure you review that and you've got everything down in relation to spongy bone. Let's talk then the chemical composition of bone. So let's look at bone from a chemical perspective. Now, there's a balance of two. Let's talk about the chemical composition of bones. When we talk about the chemical composition of bones, we're going to see we have a balance of two major components that's going to keep bones strong and durable. And that composition of the two main components is going to be, we'll see organic components and inorganic components. When we talk about the organic components will include cells. And the cells, we've seen all three types. And we also have osteoid. Osteoid is the organic part of the matrix. And this includes the ground substance and the collagen fibers. Then the inorganic components will include the hydroxyapatites mostly, which are your mineral salts, largely calcium phosphates. And then 10% calcium carbonate, and the other 5% is going to be inorganic minerals. So here we could see a patient with normal height, and here we have a patient with dwarfism. And we'll talk more about that when we get to endocrine.